folks, and welcome to this first video in our unit on the immune system, bacteria and viruses. In this video, we'll try to give you a general overview of what bacteria are, what viruses are, and some of the differences between them. All right, so bacteria, guys. We think bacteria are the first life forms on this planet. At least as far as the fossil record goes, we have found bacteria on this planet that are about 3.5 billion years old. Stromatoliths in Australia, little towers of bacteria that grew one on top of the other. Size, they're really small. They're kind of between 1 and 10 micrometers. So the biggest bacteria are about the size of the smallest human and plant cells. And you can think of most bacteria cells as being about the size of organelles inside your body, like a mitochondria or a chloroplast in a plant. We can see here on this diagram, atoms on the very left, and we can see plant and animal cells on the very right. And bacteria, the range for bacteria is in the same general area as, say, a chloroplast there. So we can make them out with a light microscope, but they're really difficult to see. Okay. And then if we go further to the left, we can see those that phage. That's actually a virus that infects bacteria. And below that, then we're getting into the size of molecules like proteins and lipids and water down there. So bacteria are small. So what's the structure of bacteria? Well, they're a cell, but they don't have a nucleus. What do we call that again? Yeah, prokaryote. Okay. We can see here on this picture that it's just a basic cell. We've got a cell membrane, okay, that regulates what goes in and out. Around that, we have something called a capsule, which is basically a cell wall. It gives it structure, support, a little protection from being crushed. And inside that, we have cytoplasm, ribosomes, and genetic material. So a pretty simple cell. Now in this slideshow I'm showing you guys, I've got a few of these don't symbols up in the corner. These are things that I think are interesting, maybe helps give a round out our understanding of bacteria a little bit, but aren't things that we're going to test you on. So that's what that symbol means when you see it in a slide. So bacteria do have different ways of moving or not moving at all. Some are non-modal. Some have flagella, kind of like it's like a little whip-like tail extension that they use like a propeller to move them through liquids. If you're familiar with what a sperm looks like, sperm have a flagellum. So very similar movement to that. Some will spiral forward. They're kind of corkscrew shaped and they'll kind of twist themselves through material. Some will secrete slime and slide in their own slime. So yeah, lots of fun ways to do it. There are some of those flagella. There's one of the spiral shaped ones, and there is one sliding in its own slime. All right, some different shapes, and you'll be familiar with these terms because a lot of the times the way we name bacteria has to do with their shapes. So if they're spherical or round shape, we call them cocci, like Streptococcus. If they're kind of rod-shaped or hot dog shaped, we call them bacilli. And if they're spiral-shaped, we call them spirilla. So sometimes we use those in the names of bacteria, but we can also use the arrangement or how they group together. Like if they tend to hang out on their own, single like that, that would be mono. So we put that name together, it'd be monococcus. If they tend to come in pairs, di for pair, we call them diplococcus. Chains of them, streptococcus, like strep throat. Or if they come in clusters, we call them staphylo. You may have heard of staph infections. So staphylococcus right there. And once again, those things, I think it's useful to know, but we're not going to test you on those. Big question, how do some bacteria make you sick? But before I get into that, a little bit later, we're going to talk about beneficial bacteria. Do most bacteria make you sick? No. Very few bacteria, in the grand scheme of things, even come close to making you sick. Most of them are living elsewhere in the world. They have nothing to do with us. They're living on surfaces. They're living in other things. They're photosynthesizing from sunlight, whatever. There's just a few that can live in us. And even of those that live in us, even fewer of them actually make us sick. Okay? But for those that do make us sick, a couple things to remember. Bacteria are living cells. Living cells need energy and produce waste, right? We learned that the very first unit of the year. So the ones that live in you, essentially, they're generally eating you or materials that are in you to get their energy. Okay, and they have to excrete waste products into you because they're living in you. So they're basically peeing in you. So the ones that make you sick, the waste products they're peeing out, are toxic to us. Okay, they're like little poisons, all right, that make us sick and mess with the ability of our cells to do their jobs. Okay, so that's one way they can make you sick: cell death, either from the toxins themselves, or they're eating things that we need to live, like nutrients, or they're like even eating bits of our cells, so that our cells stop functioning. Those are all the ways that bacteria that make you sick can make you sick. But like I said, most bacteria could care less about you and don't make you sick. Where do they get their energy from? Just like everything else, and we learned about this in the first unit. We talked about energy. Some bacteria are heterotrophs, so they eat other living things. The ones that would live in you would be heterotrophs, right? The ones that would decompose dead things would be heterotrophs. Others are autotrophs. They make their own energy, either from sunlight or from inorganic molecules. There's a few that live down in the deep ocean, way below where the sun gets, that can actually still produce their own energy using chemicals coming up from the core of the earth, which is kind of cool. To breathe or not to breathe? That is the question. Before I get into this, can you name the playwright and the play and the character that I was spoofing there? Yeah, that's Shakespeare's Hamlet. To be or not to be? That is the question. I'm terrible. All right, anyway, but this also is one that we're not going to test you on, but I think it's informative for how bacteria live. Some bacteria need oxygen on one end of the spectrum, just like we do to live. Other bacteria are actually poisoned by oxygen. Oxygen's bad for them. So let's take a look at this. So the terms here, like I said, you don't need to know these, but obligate aerobes, they're obligated to breathe air, is what that means. They need oxygen to live. An example of this would be tuberculosis. You may be familiar with that. That's a bacterial infection in the lungs. The reason it tends to get started out in the lungs is because it's got a good oxygen supply. They can't live somewhere else. They can't live deep in the body where they're not getting enough oxygen. Obligate anaerobes, we learned earlier in the year that anaerobic respiration is without air, without oxygen. So obligate anaerobes are ones that are obligated to not be in oxygen. They don't need oxygen to live, and oxygen is a poison to many of them. Botulism, C. botulinum, is a toxin that is very deadly, and it is sometimes found, it'll grow in canned food, because in canned food there's no oxygen, right? They remove the oxygen, but if the can wasn't properly canned, heated to kill all these bacteria before it was sealed, they can grow in that can and create more C. botulinum and make more of that botulinum toxin. And if you eat that, it can be very deadly. That's why canned food was a little suspect when they first started figuring out how to make it way back when. Botulinum, that's the same stuff they use for Botox. When people get those little injections of Botox to kind of tighten up their wrinkles and make themselves look young again, what that is they're actually injecting one of the deadliest toxins known to man into their skin for cosmetic reasons. Yeah, not sure about that one. Okay, there are actual, health reasons for using botulinum toxin in certain cases, but getting rid of wrinkles is just not one of them. And then we have facultative anaerobes. Those are ones that can do either. They can survive without oxygen, or they can survive with. Like E. coli. In our intestines, we can find in the soil, we can find in contaminated water. This is one that often causes food poisoning outbreaks. It's not salmonella, but E. coli. Often, if lettuce or something was in a field with manure to fertilize it, and doesn't get washed well enough before you eat it, the E. coli can survive and get into your gut. Now, E. coli is fine in our intestines, the lower part of our GI tract, but the upper part, not good, makes you sick. So there you go. All right, reproduction. So bacteria cells, they are living cells. One of the things that all living things need to do is to be able to reproduce. Bacteria don't reproduce the same way we do. We reproduce sexually, right? get a male and a female, they mix their genes, and you come up with a combination of them in the offspring. That's a little bit of each. Bacteria reproduce through something called binary fission. Binary meaning two, fission meaning to split. They basically just make a copy of their genetic material and all their other bits and pieces, ribosomes, and then they got one bacteria and it splits into two. So essentially, each bacteria is a clone of the ones that came before. Now, in that process, mutations can happen as you're replicating DNA, right? And that's where we'd get new strains of bacteria, and drug-resistant bacteria and things like that would come about via mutation. Let's watch this short video that goes over this binary fission so you can see it in action.
Some living things remain a single cell throughout their lives. For example, these are E. coli bacteria. Millions of these microscopic creatures inhabit our intestines. Bacteria are very simple creatures. Unlike most cells, a bacterium doesn't even have a nucleus. But when it comes to reproducing, bacteria are marvels of efficiency. When a bacterium reproduces, it pinches in the middle, and then the cell divides in two. Each of the two new cells is exactly like the original one. Bacteria can reproduce very rapidly. Some types divide once every 20 minutes. At this rate, a single bacterium can become over 1 billion bacteria in less than 12 hours. This kind of reproduction is called asexual reproduction, because only one parent is needed to reproduce.
Another thing that bacteria can do, now they don't sexually reproduce, where they're mixing the genes half and half from mom and dad to produce a kid, but they do have a way where they can exchange genetic material from one bacterium to another, and it's called conjugation. And they can actually do this little red line between the two called a sex pili, which basically is a tube they make between themselves, and they can pass little chunks of DNA called plasmids. You don't need to know the term plasmid, but these little chunks of DNA from one bacteria to the other, and that's the way that they can pass on beneficial genes to other bacteria around them without having to wait for this cloning process to spread it throughout the population. And you can see a short clip of it right here.
Plasmids carry genes that code for antibiotic resistance. During conjugation, plasmids can be rapidly exchanged between bacteria through pili, which allow the exchange of genetic material.
All right, so that brings us to antibiotics. I'm also going to talk about antibiotics in another video a little bit, but we'll give you a little preview here. Antibiotics are a targeted chemical weapon. You take antibiotics after you get infected. Okay, so you take them into your body internally after infection. You generally don't take them before you're infected. Reason is, it works by inhibiting some life function of the specific bacteria. For instance, it might mess with its ability to make a cell wall or turn glucose into energy. Since bacteria are alive, if we can target their life functions and we can disrupt one of those things they need to do to stay alive, we kill them. And that's how antibiotics work. Nice thing, though, is bacteria are quite a bit different from us, right? They are prokaryotes, we're eukaryotes. With cells, though there's a lot of similarities, as with all life, they are significantly different than our cells. So good antibiotics are designed to mess with a bacterial cell, but not yours. Our cells are very different. So something that messes with a bacterial cell's ability to make a cell wall, well, we don't even have cell walls, so it's not going to mess with us. Antibiotic resistance kind of combines what we were talking about with genetics and evolution with bacteria and the immune system here. So let's see that. Antibiotic resistance, it's just evolution, guys. It's just evolution of bacteria is all it is. It's survival of the fittest. Some bacteria may be able to survive an antibiotic due to their genes. So, just random chance, random luck, they have a slight difference in their cell membrane or their cell wall or something else that allows them to survive an antibiotic. Okay. Then they pass those survival genes on to the next generation, and eventually the whole colony is able to survive the antibiotic, potentially, right? Because when we give an antibiotic, what are we doing? We're altering the environment. Our bodies is the environment. The antibiotic is a new change in that environment that makes it really hard to survive. So only the strongest survive. In this case, strong and fit being able to survive the antibiotic. So if you take that antibiotic If you don't take it, if you take an antibiotic when you don't need it, because we've always got bacteria in our bodies, and usually our immune system is fighting them off before we ever even need an antibiotic. But if we take an antibiotic when we don't need it, we are increasing the chances, we're increasing the difficulty of survival for the bacteria that are in us. And if we don't kill every single one of them, and some survive, they're going to be stronger and better able to resist the antibiotic in the future. This is also a problem if you don't finish the whole prescription. If you ever had an antibiotic and the doctor says, make sure you finish the whole bottle, but some people say, well, I started feeling good after 5 days, so I stopped taking. I didn't take the last 5 days because I was feeling better and I don't want to take too much med. Please finish the medication. What's happening here is you take it for 5 days, you're killing the weakest bacteria, and maybe you're killing enough of them that your immune system can take over and get rid of the rest, so you do feel fine and you do get better. However, some of them that survive the antibiotic can get out of your body and into somebody else's. Okay? If you take the whole course of antibiotic, you're more likely to kill all or at least most of the bacteria, so you reduce the chances of antibiotic resistance ones surviving and getting out. So please finish your prescriptions. Only take them when you need them. Don't use them when you don't, because every time we're using these antibiotics, we are making the environment tougher for the bacteria to survive, which seems like it'd be a good idea. But as we know from evolution, it also means they can evolve faster because we're making it harder to survive. And since bacteria have such short life cycles, like we talked about in evolution, some of them can reproduce every 20, 30 minutes. So what is it, like 12 hours, you can get from 1 to 1 billion? In 3 days, you can go from 1 to an amount, if they have enough food, water, and space, they can equal the mass of the Earth in 3 days. Doesn't happen because they don't have unlimited resources, but they reproduce fast. So we get lots of generations. If we make the environment very tough for them to survive, and we don't wipe them out, they will develop antibiotic resistance, as we've seen. Used to be penicillin, the first one that we came up with, would kill just about any bacterial infection. Didn't need to care what it was. Today, penicillin works on hardly anything. Okay, and we're all constantly trying to stay one step ahead of the bacteria, and bacteria seem to be catching up to us. So please follow your doctor's instructions. Ecological importance. We've kind of been we're keyed in to focus on the negative aspects of bacteria, because when we talk about bacteria, we're thinking, oh, the thing that makes me sick, I don't want it. Bacteria are very important in the environment. They help with food production. Cheese, yogurt, alcohol, all of those need bacteria in them to help produce that food. Without that, you wouldn't get those things. Okay? Industrial uses, we can use them to help clean up oil spills. Medical uses, we can actually get them to make insulin. We can actually insert a human insulin gene, the gene that codes for making our protein insulin. We can insert that gene for that protein into a bacteria, and now that bacteria sitting in a vat is just pumping out human insulin, real human insulin. Okay, not an analog, not some chemical in a lab. It's made our insulin for us. And we're doing that for a long time, which is why I don't know why the insulin costs are going up for folks, because we're making it the same way. We've been making it for decades now, and yeah, I won't comment on that any further. Symbiotic relationships, organisms existing together. Bacteria do a lot of good for organisms that they work with. We've heard of like probiotics, right? Your gut bacteria. We've got a lot of bacteria living in our intestines, lots and lots of different species. Some are bad, but most of them are good for us. They seem to do something to help our digestive system. We haven't locked down exactly which ones do what and how that all works. But if we destroy those gut bacteria, which happens sometimes if you have to be on a super strong antibiotic for a very long period of time for a bad infection, it can really mess with your digestive system, be quite painful. And then in order to fix that, they've got pills you can take that'll get some probiotics in there. But if you really wipe out your gut flora, your gut bacteria, they actually do a poop transplant. Yes, they'll take poop or feces from a healthy person, hopefully in your family. Then they will literally inject it up where the sun don't shine and recolonize your gut. Not pleasant, but we do it, and it's an amazingly simple fix for a problem that we weren't able to fix before. So it's pretty cool. Nitrogen fixation. Bacteria take nitrogen in the air. Our atmosphere is mostly nitrogen, right? And they turn it into a form that plants can use. Plants can't use nitrogen from the air. They need a slightly different form of nitrogen. So those bacteria can convert that. That's some plants actually specialize in hosting nitrogen fixation bacteria, like soybeans, right? Those little nodules on them, and those nodules contain the bacteria that fixes the nitrogen. That's why you'll see farmers oftentimes rotating between corn, which pulls nitrogen out of the soil, and soybeans, which puts it back in. Saves on fertilizer. The other way to get nitrogen into the soil is lightning strikes, but you can't count on that too much. And then a big one is decomposers. When things die, bacteria heterotrophs eat them and turn them back into soil so that we can keep this amazing life process that we call planet Earth moving forward. And that does it for bacteria, guys. And now we'll get into viruses.